Good evening, everyone. Sorry to interrupt your meal. Please munch along quietly. My name is Neil Lane. I had the honor to be with you earlier today and to hear some of the panel discussions. Really was quite extraordinary event. And this evening, we have a guest speaker for our dinner, and it is my honor to be able to introduce him. Our speaker is Rice's 7th president, David Leebron. Introducing one's boss is always a tricky business. I have found that throughout my career. Once you keep the introduction short and very simple and not stretch, I can't quite do that, I think, in President Leebron's case. But I will be fairly brief. President Leebron is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, where he was elected president of the Law Review in his 2nd year. He is a lawyer who had an even greater calling than law, to teach, and through his administrative leadership, to provide thousands of young men and women with the best possible learning experiences they could have at any academic institution. Before coming to Rice in 2004 with his wife Ping Sun, also a distinguished lawyer, and their 2 children, David was dean of the Columbia Law School and held the chair as the Lucy G. Moses Professor of Law. Prior to that, he taught at NYU and UCLA, following his service as a law clerk for Judge Shirley Hufstedler of the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals in Los Angeles. He held distinguished fellowships in Germany and has traveled extensively, giving talks and advising nations across the globe. He has written a textbook on international human rights. David's impact on Rice has been remarkable. Soon after he arrived, he began a conversation with the Rice community about where Rice should be going in the future. Based on that conversation, then, he laid out a vision for the 2nd century, which is a plan for Rice's growth and advancement as one of the world's premier research universities. With that vision as a guide, Rice has experienced tangible change and in a very short period of time. Undergraduate enrollment has increased 30% since David arrived. Applications more than doubled to nearly 14,000 for the fall 2011 class. International applicants increased 5-fold in that period. Undergraduate and graduate students come from 89 different countries. He has reached out to Asia and Latin America with new study abroad programs and research collaborations. Partnerships have been expanded with the greater Houston community as well. The campus has added 2 new residential colleges and an additional food servery, a 10-story bioscience research collaborative just off the edge of the campus, where Rice researchers and students collaborate with their counterparts from other Texas Medical Center institutions. As you know, that's where the Baylor Center for Space Medicine is located. A new recreation and wellness center has been added, a central campus pavilion for coffee and conversation, an updated sports arena, a new physics building. It's always a good thing to have a new physics building, with world-class laboratories, and the public art program, a presidential initiative that has added beautiful art across the campus. All this since 2004. If it sounds breathtaking, it absolutely is. David has received many honors in the U.S. and abroad. In 2006, he was presented with France's Commander of the National Order of Merit, and in 2008, he received an honorary degree, a doctorate from Nankai University. 2010, David and his wife, Ping Sun, were selected by the Greater Houston Partnership as the city's International Executives of the Year for helping make Houston's center a center of international business. Rice, I think you know, is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. I've been here off and on for not quite half of that time, and I've known all of Rice's presidents except the first one, Edgar Odell Lovett. I think I just missed him on the way out. At Rice, we're fond of saying, Rice always attracts the right president at the right time. Well, comparing presidents is a very risky business, and I will not wander down that road. What I will say, though, well, let me put it this way. David Leebron is the right president for any time. Please join me in welcoming our president, David Leebron.
I am almost speechless after that extraordinary, kind introduction. I say almost because I'm pretty sure none of you have ever known a lawyer who was actually speechless. I only object, I want to say, to one part of that introduction. It was probably a little more detail than all these folks wanted, but I only have one specific objection, and that was you're calling me boss. And what I usually say to people at the university who call me boss is there are only two people at the university who do that without sarcasm, and you're not one of them. It's really a pleasure to speak to this gathering tonight at what's really become one of the most important events of this kind every year. And of course, here at Rice, we can't imagine a more appropriate venue for the International Space Medicine Summit than our university. Rice, of course, houses America's first space science department, and as you probably know, and I'll make several mentions of in my remarks tonight, was chosen by President John Kennedy to be one of the sites where he would announce the nation's mission to the moon in 1962. He did that, in fact, on the occasion of our semi-centennial anniversary, and so it's fitting that you are all gathered here in the year of our centennial. Indeed, this is a city where 100 years ago there was no university at all, and now we have half of our time, the last 50 years' experience, working on the many challenges related to spaceflight. And along with our friends at the Texas Medical Center and the National Space Biomedical Research Institute, which, as you heard, is now located in our Bioscience Research Collaborative, we now form part of what we like to think of as an epicenter of scientific and clinical expertise on long-duration spaceflight and its effect on humans. I want to begin by thanking Ambassador Edward Jurigian, the founding director of our Baker Institute. Universities are a little like the European Union. This may be an appropriate analogy, which is they kind of pretend to be one unified thing, but actually it's a collection of fiefdoms. And so I'm grateful to the Baker Institute for hosting this event on its premises. And of course, we want to congratulate Dr. George Abbey, who in fact joined NASA just 2 years after that speech by President Kennedy, a remarkable thing to have as a resource here at the university, somebody who brings that perspective to the development of the space program. I want to thank again Neil Lane for your efforts in bringing this to Rice, and of course Bobby Alford and other friends and colleagues at the Baylor College of Medicine. It's great to see this spirit of collaboration among the institutions of the Texas Medical Center in making this possible. And of course, I have to say, while our campus hosts a number of celebrities, and if you didn't, as you came into the building, notice the pictures on the wall, you should take notice of them going out. A number of former leaders of various world leaders and countries, some of the former, now again, present leaders of countries around the world. We're used to having celebrities, but it's always a thrill, and I want to acknowledge a number of the astronauts and cosmonauts who are here today. Like most people of my age, there are certain events that you can remember with great clarity, and I remember being a Boy Scout at the Jamboree in Idaho and watching a television somehow hooked up in the middle of a field to electricity and watching Neil Armstrong take that first step in the moon. So I'm part of that generation that has this special respect and thrill when it comes to astronauts, no matter how many there have been. Now, I was asked to speak for a few minutes on international collaboration and universities and and how we think about it, we may have had some mixed signals which have worked out to your benefit. I'm told maybe originally this was planned as a long, tedious address of about 40 minutes or something, but the last instructions I got were 10 to 15 minutes, and so that ought to cheer everybody up rather immensely. We take as our example the International Space Station, which almost by definition is a collaborative effort. And so we actually have a lot to learn from you and the efforts that have gone into that process. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, but I was kind of astonished to learn that it took 135 launches to the space station by Russian, American, Japanese, and European spacecraft to build the ISS and inhabit it, and that the spacecraft has now been maintained, monitored, repaired, designed, studied, equipped, redesigned by men and women from at least 15 countries. And that doesn't even begin to address the on-the-ground collaborations and development of knowledge that both produced the knowledge to make it possible and are now utilizing and analyzing the data that it has produced. So that, as you see back on the poster, everything, for those of you not from the United States, you have to know that everything bigger than approximately the size of an automobile must be compared in size to a football field. That's the general rule. We don't use feet, inches, miles. They're football fields, and so the fact that this is 2 football fields duly impresses all of us. Now, we've come a long way since 50 years ago at Rice Stadium that President Kennedy made that remarkable speech. And while the speech spoke of advancing science through space exploration, quote, for the good of all men, the space race, in fact, was a race in the classic sense, born of competition and indeed a threat to our national interest, a sense that this was, in the words of economists, a kind of zero-sum game, that either the Soviet Union was going to win or we were going to win. President Kennedy, and I think many others from that time, including perhaps some here with us tonight, would no doubt be surprised to see this conference and other international collaborations that have recognized that not only the kind of lofty goals that President Kennedy set forth stretch across nations, but in fact, the working path toward achieving those goals, those daily efforts, must truly harness the best of all mankind. That's a remarkable transformation in 50 years of the space program that really serves as a great symbol to us all. Competition has truly turned into international collaboration in the arena of space. And that brings me to the special case of universities, which I think of as very distinctive participants in our societies. We are motivated indeed by the very best of the motivations that underlie our space program from the outset. And even though most universities of the world are public or state institutions, with a minority which, like us, are private, not-for-profit institutions, only rarely does the motivation of universities take any nationalistic form. And when it does occur, it is more often than not because it is something the universities desire to do, but because it is externally imposed by our governments. Universities truly and traditionally see knowledge and knowledge discovery as the common heritage of all mankind. The first scientific collaborations among those at universities date back at least to the 16th and 17th centuries, and international scientific conferences emerged as a major form of information exchange and collaboration in the mid-19th century. So this conference carries on that tradition. Universities are indeed competitive, But more often than not, we pursue that competition against, frankly, more often other domestic universities by seeking international collaborations. More often than not, we find ourselves growing stronger, not through collaborations with other American universities, but by seeking collaborations around the world. And of course, the internationalization of universities is not limited to our research endeavors. Students have wandered across borders to go to universities, going not only back to the first Western universities founded in the 10th century in Bologna, but indeed back to the proto-universities that existed, for example, in 6th century India. Student wandering became really part of what universities were about. And so while internationalism at universities is not new, the pace of international activity on both the education and research levels has, in recent years, I think, been growing almost geometrically. These developments have been fueled over the 20th century by three things. First was the development of fast and cheap transportation. When the founding president of Rice was hired, Edgar Odell Lovett, he was a remarkably brilliant man. He came from Princeton. He was hired in 1908. And the first thing he did was negotiate a trip around the world to visit all the great universities of the world at that time. Now, I tried to negotiate that same deal, but I failed. But of course, how did he do that? He took, imagine this, he took a 9-month trip around the world, going across the Atlantic, which I think at the time took close to 2 weeks or something like that, just to get to England, right? And then, of course, it was by railroad across Europe, across Siberia to Japan, and then again by boat across the Pacific. And in the only truly bad act of bad judgment that I've been able to discover on his part, spent only 24 hours in Hawaii before returning to San Francisco. So think of that today. Indeed, just in my lifetime, less than my lifetime, if you look at the real cost of airline transportation, a ticket to Asia or South America today, say somewhere around $1,500 coach, would be $600 in 1980 dollars. Now, if those of you can remember 1980 and how much you paid for airfare, it was a lot more than $600. The cost of airfare has been both going down and by and large getting a little bit faster and more efficient, putting aside, of course, the time you're waiting in security at the airport. So that's the first of the things which has fueled the internationalization of higher education, is the ability to get almost anywhere in the world in less than a day. In fact, my provost just went to China to put the final touches on an agreement that we have with, I think it was Tsinghua University, and he literally went to China for a day and a half. That takes a little stamina. So the second thing which has happened is much more recent, and that's with the internet and the World Wide Web, virtually free, instantaneous transmission of data and information, including, maybe not quite on the scale that some of you are used to, but very large quantities of data transmitted virtually instantaneously across the world. Those are the two things kind of fueling international research collaboration, movement of students. And the third, which I mentioned with some hesitation to this audience, but I think realism demands, is the spread of English as the lingua franca of research and higher education. I sometimes describe myself, and I apologize to anybody who's offended by this, as the very last person to take German under the belief that it was the scientific language of the world. It turned out to be useful because I did my research on a 19th century German chemist, and so that was a lot of fun. But this availability of English has made that exchange of information even more valuable and enabled our students to go around the world even when they may not be able to speak the language of the country to which they're going. Now, I want to say it is much better when they go and immerse themselves in that foreign civilization, so to speak, but the fact that we can send students to China or Germany or Turkey who don't speak the language of those places, to me, is a huge advantage, because the values of that experience, although not as rich as when they can immerse themselves in those foreign countries, are much better than not going at all. So education and research are now truly a global market, as are the markets, in fact, for students and faculty. I was somewhat amazed when I came here to Rice to learn that for us, over 20% of both our students and our faculty are foreign citizens, not counting anybody who's become an American citizen but may have been educated abroad. That's a remarkable thing when you think about it, and a change in the world, that people, not only can they go abroad for an international experience, but if they come to Rice for their education and sit down with a table of 5 people, chances are one of those 5 people is from somewhere else around the world. The search for talent, as all of you know, is global. Now, I have to mention that extends to every aspect of the university, including, this being Texas, importantly, our sports teams. Our basketball team, for example, this year had players from Iran, Egypt, Lebanon, Germany, and Canada. Our tennis teams included players from Germany, Guatemala, Bolivia, the Philippines, England, and Australia. I recently had the tennis team over for dinner at our home, and I sympathized with the Americans on the team who had to work so hard to make themselves interesting. I want to actually point out one more aspect of internationalization that is recently manifest on this campus, is our campus art. And I don't know if any of this has been called to your attention. As you go out the door here, to the left, you'll see this remarkable piece of art that looks a little bit like a Mayan pyramid, which is a sky space by the artist James Turrell. He would hate this. I like to refer to it as the mountain, because the sides are grass, and that may make it the highest elevation in Houston. If you go out the door to your right, a very, I think, symbolic piece of art, and if you have a chance after dinner, and it'll be dark enough maybe, go out to your right and then take another right, still sort of on the side of the road next to the building, and look down a grove of trees, and you'll see a piece of art by the Spanish artist Jaume Plensa. It's called Mirror. And not only is it international in the sense of being a foreign artist who installed a work on our campus, but these are 2 sculptures of sort of seated bodies facing each other, and as you get close, if you have a chance, you will see that those bodies are made out of the letters from 8 different alphabets from around the world. Truly a symbol, in some ways, of the global and international conversation that occurs every day at a university like ours, and of course, so many of the universities like yours. Turning back a little bit to science, we recently received a new supercomputer known as Blue Gene from the IBM Corporation, and really oriented in part toward work in the biomedical arena, understanding things beyond my pay grade, like protein folding, for example. Now, our partner in that endeavor, because it's very expensive, it's not as expensive as a space station, and even though this was largely a gift from IBM, just the costs of operating a computer of this kind are tremendously expensive, and we really needed a partner in the endeavor. Where did we find our partner? We found our partner in Brazil at the University of Sao Paulo. How did we find our partner? In part through one of our biophysicists who we recruited to Rice last year, who happens to be Brazilian. He now lives in the United States. He's a full professor at Rice, but he has been the link in connecting us into the scientific establishment in Brazil. That's what's happening at universities. Yet, as the barriers of travel and communication recede, new barriers emerge and become visible. And these undercut what I believe should be the internationally oriented mission of universities. Now, I don't want to be naive in the ways in which we think about the world. There are serious issues of intellectual property and national security. But we do want to be distinctive participants in both the national and international arena. Participants who advance a broader perspective on our human endeavors. It is in that way that I think we as universities are different from both government and business and economic actors in our societies. We see the world much more in global human terms, not only in the talent that we can recruit from around the world, but also in the problems that we seek to solve. To give you one example, at Rice, we have a tremendous bioengineering, which has various endeavors, and one of the things they have been developing is very low-cost solutions to health problems which are suitable for developing countries. Centrifuges made out of salad spinners, incubators for newborn babies made out of locally available materials in places like Africa. These people are not solving problems from the United States. Our nanoscientists who are developing new methods of removing arsenic from water. Again, these people are not solving problems in the United States. They are looking around the world with an empathy and sympathy for peoples all around the world. And that, I think, is universities at their very best. But the important barriers of today become the competition for valuable information, reflected or not in intellectual property rights, and the attempt to secure that information both through protection and through theft. And I want to emphasize both of those are problems in fostering university relationships, over protection of information and theft of information. Governments who impose restrictions on both the movement of people and information, imposed either for economic or national security reasons, and on restrictions on ability to provide education, sometimes through accrediting processes to realize the fruits of education. This is something we see in the United States, where highly educated people come to the United States, for example, who are doctors or in other fields, lawyers or architects, and the barriers that we put in front of those people to participate in our own national economy. Now, I want to say, and I don't have too much to say about this tonight, and I say that with some apologies, this kind of describes the world of today. There is literally a tsunami that you can view metaphorically offshore, which goes by the name digital or distance education, which is something that's been talked about and technologically feasible in many respects for many, many years. But I'm sure most of you have probably read about the recent course taught at Stanford in artificial intelligence, where the professor had 100,000 students enrolled worldwide in that course. This is about to fundamentally change the face of higher education around the world, as people can sit at home with their computers and their terminals. And we have another professor who's now off in Singapore developing special educational computers that cost something like, they're called the iSlate. It costs like $38 a piece or something like that. And so when you start marrying these technologies together, all of a sudden people can sit wherever they are, as long as they have an internet connection, which is still a challenge for some people, and take a course at Rice or MIT or Stanford. That's going to change the globalization of higher education. The development, coming back to you folks for a moment, the development of space exploration today, in my view, needs to be the example. It is the example and beacon to the rest of mankind. And universities are best positioned not merely to reap the benefits of international education and collaboration, but indeed what we can uniquely do is help to create a population across nations which sees such international engagement and cross-fertilization as both essential to solving problems and spiritually satisfying as human beings. And that brings me a little bit back to the conference. President Kennedy, in that speech that I've mentioned, asked the question of why choose to go to the moon as our goal. He said in part, quote, "Because the goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills." When we look back over the last 50 years of space exploration, I think we have to conclude that we could not possibly have imagined all the benefits that have in fact come from the challenge of space travel. New materials for terrestrial, not just space life, new forms of global communication. And so we know that ultimately this conference on space medicine, which seeks to bring the best people from around the globe to address the questions of human potential, is not merely about medical issues in long-duration space travel. Out of that challenge, we know with virtual certainty what will come is an array of valuable new understandings of human physiology, of new ways of delivering treatment, of new devices that can serve people in isolated communities. I have to say, I learned this evening of a benefit that might be personal. I learned that about this Mars 500 thing, where people are going to be locked up together for 500 days, and we're going to have to learn how they deal with that under those circumstances. I am virtually certain that something valuable for university presidents is going to come out of that on managing their faculties. This challenge will, as President Kennedy said, organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Now, when President Kennedy spoke 50 years ago, he was in fact probably referring to our American energies. Today, we refer, I think, to our global energies and skills. If we can organize those, we can do much more than send a man to the moon or even to Mars and beyond. We can ultimately improve the lives of all those here on Earth, and who knows, maybe even those elsewhere. We at Rice are honored to host this important summit, and we wish you well as you pursue what at Rice we like to say, in the words of our founder, of truly no upper limit to our endeavors. Thank you very much.